A white noise machine whirred by the door, dampening their conversation so it wouldn't bleed into the waiting area. Dr. Green stared at Albert with his eyes fixed, not blinking. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling reflected off his bald head and onto the wall like a sun catching the face of a watch.
And have you heard the voices before?
No, never.
Dr. Green leaned back in his chair, uncrossed his legs, then crossed them the other way.
Do the voices frighten you?
Not really. They're just kind of raspy. Or, no, more high-pitched. Squeaky, yeah. Very squeaky.
Dr. Green clasped his hands and rested them on his knee.
Squeaky.
Albert nodded. A grave look rolled over Dr. Green's face before it fell flat again. He gave Albert a polite but unconvincing smile.
What do the voices say?
Albert let out an embarrassed chuckle.
I won't laugh, Mr. Arnett.
They,
Albert slowly moved his hands in front of his chest as he searched for words.
They say, hungry, hungry, hungry. And, food, food, food. A few times I heard my name.
Do they always say hungry and food in threes?
No. I mean, they say those same two words over and over again, but...
Interesting. When do you hear them?
I mostly hear them outside. On my way to or from work. On the subway. Once I heard them when I was out to dinner with my wife, but, just barely. I could have been imagining that one.
The subway.
Mm-hmm.
Is your job stressful, Mr. Arnett?
Albert snickered in spite of himself.
Yes. Very.
And are things at home okay?
Albert rubbed his hands together and looked at the floor.
Yeah, things aren't great. We're working a few things out, or I'm trying to work things out, at least.
It sounds like you're under a lot of stress. It could be panic attacks.
Huh. I've never heard of anyone hearing voices because of stress.
Dr. Green stood up. Albert began to rise, but Dr. Green motioned for him to stay seated. He went over to a cabinet and picked through medical supplies while speaking over his shoulder.
Stress can reveal latent psychological issues or even precipitate new diagnoses. I imagine you feel considerable stress on your way to and from work, and it might get worse when you get home.
Dr. Green smiled as he brought over a needle and a vial.
I'm gonna take some blood. Could you roll up your sleeve, please?
Dr. Green rolled up Albert's sleeve and smoothed out his forearm, looking for a vein. He wrapped a tourniquet above his elbow.
Now lay your arm out straight and stay still. Time to look away if you don't like needles.
Albert turned his head.
I want to check in on your thyroid and rule a few other things out. Sometimes a hyperactive thyroid is misdiagnosed as panic attacks. They are all done.
Dr. Green pulled out the syringe and placed a cotton swab on Albert's arm.
Take this, apply pressure.
Albert squeezed. Dr. Green closed the vial, wrote Albert's name on it, and put it in a plastic baggie.
So, what else do you need to rule out?
Dr. Green smiled and put a Band-Aid over the cotton ball.
Look, I'm not too concerned. The fact the voices are squeaky, that's a bit unusual. It could mean something serious, or it could be nothing at all. Let's connect in a few days.
Dr. Green walked to the door and opened it. Albert got up and headed out.
Thanks.
As he was leaving the room, Dr. Green grabbed him by the wrist. His eyes were dead, his brow furrowed, and his look severe. He whispered harshly,
No matter what, don't eat garbage.
Albert raised his eyebrow.
You mean junk food?
Dr. Green paused. Light came back into his eyes, and his face went back to normal.
Yes, like junk food. I'll see you soon.
Albert left, and Dr. Green slammed the door behind him. Albert sat upright, dozing on the couch with his arms crossed. Leftovers warmed up to room temperature on the kitchen counter, sweating in glass Tupperware. He napped restlessly. The tiniest noises would wake him up as soon as he drifted off. His hearing had been painfully acute lately, and sharp, like he could pinpoint exactly where sounds were coming from. The phone rang. He watched it ring in its cradle until the answering machine picked it up.
It's Becca. I'm still at the hospital. Benton got sent home with the flu, so I took his shift. I'll be here overnight. There are leftovers in the fridge, and there's...
Becca stopped and whispered away from the receiver. Albert could hear a man's voice in the background. Becca stifled a giggle and shushed whoever was with her.
Yeah, so there are leftovers in the fridge, and remember, tonight is garbage night. Don't forget to take it out. Something in there stinks.
Albert heard the man's voice again, and Becca laughed full on this time.
Stop. Yeah, they need me. Tomorrow afternoon, I'm going straight from work to Rachel's graduation party, so I'll see you there. Bye.
The answering machine clicked off, stuttered a few times, then went silent. A green light blinked, announcing a new message. Albert yawned and peeled himself off the couch. Headlights ran across the walls as a car rolled down the street. He could feel the vibration of the tires against the road on the soles of his feet. He felt a strange urge to hide until it passed, but he shook the feeling away. He went to the garbage can and stepped on the lever. It swung open. A warm, humid smell emanated from the trash. The ink printed on junk mail bled across the paper, made greasy with picked-over chicken thighs. Romaine lettuce, wet with stinking, oily dressing, wilted against paper towels, and a days-old yet still damp coffee filter. Albert salivated when the odor caught his nose. A strange sensation of sudden, ravenous hunger shot through his body, and he felt the urge to dig into the garbage head first. He could almost feel the filth mushing over his tongue and filling his cheeks when he tied the garbage off and went outside. Albert stood alone in the crowded backyard. A string of gold and brown balloons hung from the fence, interrupted every 10 feet with signs that said, "Congratulations, grad!" A full bottle of beer warmed in his hand. Becca was over an hour late. He compulsively checked his watch and would snap around whenever the sliding door opened, disappointed every time it wasn't her. A voice huffed behind him. He turned and saw his niece Rachel facing him, rolling her eyes. Albert's sister and Doug stood behind her with big, cartoonish smiles.
Go ahead, Rachel.
His brother-in-law prodded. Rachel huffed.
Thank you for coming to my party, Uncle Albert.
Albert smiled.
And?
His sister Catherine continued. Rachel stomped her feet.
Thank you for the card and the money. I'll put it towards something good.
She said in a quick monotone without making eye contact.
No problem, kiddo. Congrats. So you settled on Michigan, huh? I'm a Buckeye, so I think that makes
Dad,
us.
can I please go hang out with my friends now?
Rachel interrupted, turning her back. Doug chuckled, flashing his toothy grin while he patted her on the shoulder.
Sure thing, Pumpkin Pie. Go have fun.
Rachel stormed off.
She loves her Uncle Albert,
Said Catherine with dead eyes, still smiling. Albert sighed.
Hey, where's your better half?
Asked Doug. Albert looked at the ground.
On her way. She said she'd be here, but had to work late, overnight.
Doug and Catherine looked at each other. Doug stifled a quick smirk, and Catherine bit her lip. They stood in silence before Doug cut in.
Say, Al, I could use some help getting the cornhole set out of the garage. Give me a hand, huh?
Doug turned and weaved his way through the backyard. Albert followed until a large man in wraparound sunglasses slapped Doug on the back.
Big Doug!
Boomed the giant.
Clarky, when did you get here?
Doug and the man started chatting. The man introduced Doug to his wife, and Doug kissed her on the cheek. Albert hung around waiting for Doug to introduce him, but he seemingly forgot Albert was there. Albert stepped away and scanned the backyard. People talked in small circles. Children chased each other through the crowd. Women rested their heads on their husbands' shoulders as their husbands held them around the waist. Albert looked around for Becca when his eyes landed on the garbage can. The noise of the party faded away. He salivated as he watched guest after guest drop their dirty paper plates into the trash. Potato salad was smeared against the edges of the black bag. Macaroni salad dried on plastic forks in the sun. A few flies swirled around, dive-bombing crumbs of cake. Albert licked his lips. A crazed sense of hunger squeezed his brain. He felt like a man in the desert, dying of thirst, finally coming upon an oasis. He wanted to sink his teeth into the trash like a starved dog finding a steak. A bony hand grabbed his wrist.
Albert? Hello?
Becca was at his side. A tall, handsome man stood behind her, smiling.
I said this is Mark. We work together.
We do way more than that.
Mark whispered in Becca's ear. Albert looked at both of them, but his attention was on the garbage.
Hi, Becca. Hi, Mark. I'm Albert. Excuse me. I need to take the garbage out.
Albert beelined for the trash can.
I don't know what his fucking problem is.
Muttered Becca behind him, but Albert didn't care. He was focused. He lifted the bag and tied it off.
Just a sec, everybody.
He said over his shoulder. No one noticed. Albert carried the trash out of the backyard and shut the gate behind him. He looked around. No one was there. He crept to the side door of the garage and let himself in. The screen door wheezed and he gently pulled it shut. Albert dragged the trash into the middle of the carless garage. Hedge clippers and a weed whacker hung from the wall. A pile of junk sat atop an expensive, untouched tool bench. He stared down at the bag. A fly buzzed around it. The trash stank like warm beer and hot ketchup. Albert couldn't hold back. He ripped the bag open and fell in, face first, cramming food into his mouth. He swallowed wet, half-eaten hot dog buns without chewing. He scooped hot broccoli salad and jammed it in his mouth with all 4 fingers, licking the plates clean. He drank the backwash out of beer bottles and gnawed on spent chicken wings when the side door opened.
I am the king of cornhole, Clarky. What do you say we put a Finsky on the first game?
Holy fuck!
Screamed Clarky. Albert froze and stared at him.
Albert? What the fuck are you doing?
Shouted Doug. Doug slammed his hand against the garage door opener, and light poured in as it rose. Albert's eyes darted between the man and the opening garage door. He debated his next move as a crowd gathered around to see the commotion.
Oh my God!
Screamed an old man.
He's disgusting!
Cried a woman.
Albert!
Shrieked Becca. She stood at the front of the garage with her hands clasped over her mouth in horror. Mark held her close. Every human instinct told Albert to run, but just as he was about to bolt out of the garage, he went back in, eating more insanely, burping, swallowing down vomit before going in for more.
Catherine, get my gun!
Screamed Doug.
Call the police!
Someone shouted.
Kill him!
Screamed a deep voice. Sensing his life was in danger, Albert picked up what he could of the trash and dashed out.
I want a divorce. I want a divorce!
Screamed Becca, fainting into Mark's arms. Albert ran to his car and opened the passenger door. He threw the garbage onto the seat, slammed the door, and bolted to the other side. His side mirror exploded, followed by the sharp crack of a rifle report. He got in and peeled away. As the house shrank in his rear view, he saw Doug zeroing in with his rifle. Doug was about to shoot when Clarky motioned for him to put it down. Albert sat in the waiting room with his head in his hands. Classical music played overhead, drowning out the conversations behind closed doors. The water cooler next to him burped. Albert ran his fingers over his forehead as Dr. Green's door opened, and he peeked out. "Albert!" he said, more of a command than an invitation. Albert got up and went into Dr. Green's office. Dr. Green motioned for Albert to sit, so he did. An overhead projector stood in the middle of the room, facing a white screen. Dr. Green plugged it in. The projector cast a blank white square against the wall.
Doc, I need help.
Whimpered Albert. Dr. Green didn't acknowledge him. He took a folder off his desk and pulled out a few transparent pages. He walked to the projector and slammed a page on top of it. A busy image covered the wall.
Do you know what this is?
Dr. Green asked without facing Albert.
No.
These are red blood cells.
He turned to Albert.
Healthy red blood cells.
He swept the page off and put another one on, more zoomed in.
Appreciate their shape. Flat, with a depressed center. They look like a disc or a donut without a hole. Do you appreciate this?
Yeah, I guess.
Now,
Said Dr. Green, pulling off the sheet and putting another one on top.
this is your blood.
It was another wide shot, but something was off about the blood cells. They weren't round. They looked odd, with corners,
Take a closer look.
said Dr. Green sternly. He put another sheet on the projector. A close-up of Albert's blood cells were projected against the wall. Albert put his hand over his mouth, and his eyes went wide. Blood pounded in his ears as his tongue swelled.
What do you see?
Asked Dr. Green. Albert stared at the projection of his blood cells. They weren't red. They were yellow, almost orange, and they weren't discs. They were more square, shaped like wedges with holes punched in them.
They look like blocks of Swiss cheese.
Stammered Albert.
Precisely. Cheese.
Barked Dr. Green. He turned off the projector and pushed it against the wall. He took a seat behind his desk and folded his hands.
Dr. Green, what does this mean?
Dr. Green spoke, dismissing his question.
I knew it, but I had to be sure. When we last met and you mentioned squeaking, the voice is hungry for food. Only hearing them in the subway or outside, the kitchen of a restaurant, and now the blood test confirmed it.
Confirmed what?
Dr. Green cleared his throat and furrowed his brow.
Mr. Arnett, you're turning into a rat.
Albert gasped. The room spun and his breathing became rapid.
What?
What? A rat, Mr. Arnett. A filthy fucking rat. I told you not to eat garbage. And now it's too late. Your DNA is all mixed with the trash and now there's no turning back. Make your peace with God, Mr. Arnett. There's nothing I can do. I don't treat rats.
He growled through clenched teeth.
But Dr. Green, there must be...
See yourself out.
Dr. Green opened a desk drawer. He started putting mouse traps on his desk, one by one. Albert stood and took a step towards him. Dr. Green shot to his feet and grabbed a letter opener, pointing it at Albert like a dagger.
You come one step closer and I'll slit your fucking throat.
He hissed. Dr. Green mocked him as he picked up the phone.
I have O'Reilly Pest Control on speed dial. Don't make me hit the button. Now get the fuck out.
He swiped the letter opener in the air. Albert backed out of the office with his hands up. The lawyer sat at the head of the long boardroom table, poring over the documents in front of her. Sick, wrinkled skin sagged from her face. Curly hair shot out of the sides of her head in either direction like a clown. Becca sat across from Albert with Mark at her side. A phone sat on the table between them and Albert. Becca wore a black dress, like a widow, complete with a small cap and a lace veil that hung over her face. She refused to make eye contact with Albert. Mark rubbed her back, glaring at Albert. Albert slowly sipped a glass of water. The lawyer huffed.
Well,
She said, removing her reading glasses and putting them on the table.
the court can't simply grant a divorce considering the circumstances.
What do you mean?
Growled Mark.
Divorce is a legal process that ends a marriage between two humans, Mr. Peters. As Mr. Arnett here is a filthy rat, the court needs to enact special procedures.
Albert hung his head.
If a party could get a divorce simply by claiming one was a rat, divorces would happen left and right.
But you saw the blood test. He's a rat.
Said Becca, dabbing her eyes with scrunched up tissues.
Yes, but the community must be satisfied. It needs to be public record. Relax, Ms. Arnett. It's actually quite easy. All Albert here needs to do is take out an ad in the local paper, announcing he's a filthy rat, then everyone will know.
Albert snorted, setting down his glass of water.
I'm not doing that.
All three of them stared at him. Mark sneered.
You rotten, disgusting...
Please, Mr. Peters.
The lawyer cut him off.
Look, Albert, you will take out that advertisement.
Or else what?
The lawyer sneered.
Or else I will advise Ms. Arnett and Mr. Peters to call an exterminator. They could lay a trap for you. Who's to say I didn't put rat poison in that glass of water you've been drinking from?
Albert's heart sped up.
But that's murder.
All three of them laughed.
Murder.
Cackled the lawyer.
Right, murder. Have you ever caught a mouse in a mousetrap, Mr. Arnett? Did the police show up? When you've seen rat traps on the subway, did they dispatch detectives to start interviewing witnesses?
Albert swallowed hard. He looked across the table at Mark and Becca. Mark smirked at him. The lawyer slid a manila envelope across the desk to Albert.
In here, you'll find the number to 2 local papers, the Nightly News and the local NPR station. Pick your poison. We'll wait here while you make the call.
The lawyer reached across the table and pulled over the phone that sat between them. Albert shook his head.
I'm not doing this.
The lawyer snickered.
Fine. Have it your way. Jerry, would you please come in?
Called the lawyer. The office door opened. A man with a giant zitty forehead and eyes that were too far apart walked in. He was in work clothes and carried a steel tube of pesticides attached to a long metal sprayer. He had a name tag that said, Jerry. On his sleeve was an emblem that said, O'Reilly Pest Control.
Make the call, you disgusting rat.
Growled Mark. Jerry shut the door behind him and blocked the exit. He grinned, showing a mouth that was nearly all gums and about 1 millimeter of teeth. He leaned to the side and farted loudly. Albert sighed and picked up the phone. Albert staggered down the street. A tangled, weeks-old beard clung to his sunken face. Ripped, dirty clothes hung from his skinny frame. He'd stop every few paces to pick up and eat a cigarette butt or gnaw on a discarded chicken bone. Every so often, someone sitting on their stoop would cry, "Eek, a rat!" and run up the stairs, holding their pants or skirts up, dancing back and forth in terror. Albert walked for weeks, losing weight, eating out of garbage cans at night and sleeping under cars during the day. Rats squeaked at him and he'd squeak back. None of them were ready to make friends with him quite yet. He had to earn their trust. One evening, as Albert tried to sleep beneath a busted Ford Astrovan, hunger drove him out onto the sidewalks before the sun had gone down. He crawled across the sidewalk looking for filth to eat when a voice called out,
Oh my god, it's my Uncle Albert.
That's the guy who ruined your party!
cried a cracking voice. Albert turned around and saw his niece, Rachel, flanked on either side by a few teens on mountain bikes. They stood over their crossbars with their arms folded. Albert squeaked at her, begging to be left alone, but she couldn't understand him.
He looks rabid,
Cried one of the rude teens.
Let's teach him a lesson.
Laughed another. They crouched on their bikes and took after him, barking like dogs, salivating like beasts. Albert ran away with his hands in the air, squeaking insanely. He was too exhausted to move very fast, and the teens quickly gained on him. He turned the corner and ran down into the subway. The teens ditched their bikes and ran down after him. Albert darted underneath the turnstiles. He ran down the subway platform until he reached a dead end. The teens spilled onto the platform and started laughing.
Nowhere to run, Rat Man!
One of the menacing teens called out.
Let's make rat stew.
Called another in a concerningly dumb voice. Albert stepped backwards when he heard an intense squeaking.
Albert! Albert! Down here!
Albert looked down on the tracks. 2 rats were looking up at him, motioning for him to come down.
Jump, Albert. You'll be safe with us.
Squeaked one,
We'll protect you.
squeaked another. The teens were mere feet away from him, barking like dogs, their howls echoing through the subway.
Jump, Albert. Jump. Come on.
Albert smirked.
It's me if you can.
Albert jumped onto the tracks, but landed weird. He slammed down too hard on his right leg, and he felt his ankle shatter in its socket. He cried, squeaking. He stumbled to the side.
Look out, Albert.
Squeaked one of the rats. Albert fell face first onto the tracks, and his forehead hit the electrified 3rd rail. A flash of light burst through the subway. 750 volts blew through him, vaporizing any moisture in his body, exploding his organs and frying his brains. He was dead in an instant. The rude teens looked at one another. They dropped down on their hands and knees and started howling, their faces upward like wolves crying at the moon. The 2 rats on the tracks looked at one another and then looked at Albert. One nodded to the other, and then they descended on his body. They chewed at his clothes, ripping it to pieces that they would add to their nests deep in the bowels of the subway system. The teens began wrestling with each other like dogs, growling, pinning one another, and biting at one another's necks. The alpha teen got to his feet, held his fists against his chest, and let out a wild howl. The teens stopped fighting and ran down the platform on all 4s, barking. The rats carried the scraps of Albert's clothes away. Tomorrow, they'd be back to feast on his body. The following summer, Becca gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Hannah.